Welcome to another Friends in Wonder podcast, a place where we invite you to wonder with us about meaningful topics without judgment or limits. Brought to you by two lifelong friends looking for insights through a lens of how can this help?
I'm Joe Luther.
And I'm Vince Kern, and we're your hosts. Now let's wander and wonder together. All right, welcome to another podcast. I'm Vince.
And I am Joe.
How are you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing great, Vince. Excited once again to tackle a new topic, but just really enjoying the beautiful, well, I guess it's still spring, beautiful early summer day.
Yeah, it is great out there. And we just got back from a bit of an excursion, you for a week and 2 weeks for me up in the beautiful UP of Michigan. And so it's good to be back here. It's great to get away from television, everything for a while.
Get off the grid.
And now that we're back, we've been getting back into the daily routine and checking out the news and things like that. And there's a lot going on. And
yeah, I know. It's sad when you have to come back from being off the grid because there is something just so relaxing.
Yeah.
If it's just how quiet it is, I think there's probably, issues that we can't even feel like EMFs and whatnot, but just being off the grid and being away from the buzz is so therapeutic. And then coming back into it can be, it's a matter of how long can this recharging last before we get pulled right back into some of the hustle bustle of everyday life.
Yeah. Coming out of COVID and getting back to reality, we're getting back into these events. And so getting charged up for that type of interrelations with society and all of that. And right now, I think a lot of people are talking about a lot of different things and using some muscles that maybe they didn't use during COVID, which is that interpersonal relationship when maybe
socializing.
They're socializing, and it turns into, politics and whatnot. And I think there's a bit of tension right now. Obviously, we're kind of a divided nation. And, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking about, and this term popped into my head called positional correctness. And
Positional correctness.
Positional correctness. So it could
just what we need, another correctness.
Right.
But I'm interested. I know we talked about this. I'm interested to hear where you're going with this.
Well, sometimes you run into conversations and they just start happening, and people want to tell you what your position should be. And I think sometimes it could be your boss, and it could be a sibling, an older sibling. It could be any sibling. But I think there's something that is developed over time where, because I'm X, I think I know what's best for you. And so it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, and it's especially timely today because, coming out of COVID, as you said, in exercising these muscles, these social muscles that we haven't used in a while, we're doing it at a time when it's really a politically charged, environment. Not just politically, it's just polarized, I think is really what I meant to say. Because it's not just polarized on politics, but it's polarized on so many things. And because of that, people come together and they've got these strong opinions, and it can get a little dicey out there.
Right. We want to have meaningful conversations. We want to come together. We want to be connected as humans. And then this tribalism kind of gets in the way. And beyond tribalism, I think positional correctness is this sort of stubbornness to not be open to other views, to maybe not even explore other views because you know that you're correct. You might even have been programmed to think that in terms of your childhood. If you're, say, an older sibling who's feels responsible for looking after the rest of the flock, right? Or you're a boss and you've been giving people assignments, so therefore you must be right.
Right. And I think even your educational status or one's educational status can play into that too. I know being educated as a lawyer, sometimes I get ahead of myself and believe that I'm an expert on all things that have to do with, legal matters, although gosh knows I run the other way when people say, "Hey, you're a lawyer. Can you help me with this?" But, even though I know darn well I'm not an expert on many things, there are times, especially when you get into these charged conversations, like you said, where you feel like your position is correct. Things just they get less about, friendly discourse or critical thinking, which is a whole different term, but it just becomes emotional and it's a little sloppy right now.
Yeah. I wonder what critical thinking, when people say critical thinking, I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's actually kind of another word that's a little bit charged because people are using that, kind of to take a higher ground to say, "Oh, you're not thinking critically," or let's do some critical thinking, as if they have all the currency when it comes to political correctness or critical thinking.
Yeah, and then the listener feels already devalued.
And defensive, exactly.
Right.
So yeah, I hesitate to use the critical thinking idea, but only to demonstrate what you're talking about with this positional correctness is that there's such a charged atmosphere out there right now that people are dug in, and they're dug in for a lot of emotional reasons, or maybe for reasons that explore a little bit more discussing, which is what I'm excited to talk about today.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So different people. If you think about positional correctness, do I really care what the guy down the street what he has to say, as opposed to
when he puts a sign in his yard, sometimes it triggers, or if you happen to walk down the street and it exposes about something. Hopefully he doesn't expose, but espouses on something. Yeah, I mean, typically you don't really care what the neighbor down the street thinks, but when you come to a family event, that's a little different.
Right. I mean, if the neighbor down the street isn't generally knocking on your door talking about how, politics or whatever. And if they are, maybe you can just kind of get rid of them and humor them and you develop your boundaries in your relationships. But with family or close friends, it's a little bit different.
Yeah. And I just had a real dose of that over the weekend because my brother's daughter got married, and of course you were at the wedding as well. But it was interesting. I was just watching and listening, and hadn't seen my older sister in a while, and I hadn't seen a number of nieces and nephews and old friends and even acquaintances who are friends of my brother. It's just really interesting because, in the old days, everyone would talk about the weather or sports, but people are not hesitant at all to talk about what they think about what's going on in the world right now. And I think this positional correctness idea is a real good one to talk about because, I noticed that a bit with my siblings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Weddings are a great place to see it's sort of the microcosm of our culture, right? Because you have all these different people who aren't necessarily always together, but they come into the room with a loving, unified purpose.
Right. We're there for the groom and bride.
And then things turn to political.
Well, you have a couple of glasses of champagne and people loosen up a little bit, and it isn't long before we're violating that rule to not talk about politics or just charged discussions at family events.
I wonder if it's sometimes more tension between in terms of the positional correctness, if that creates a little bit more tension among family members and dear friends, because.
Well, I think for sure with siblings, like you and I both have older sisters, and just from that standpoint, you've got the positional family member who was, the first one, into the sibling unit, and has a different relationship with parents, and then is probably the one first tasked with looking after kids that come later. So they take on kind of this self-identified role of being, the substitute mother hen.
Right. The parents teach the children, the oldest siblings, look after the younger siblings. So whether consciously or subconsciously, they're sort of doing the same kind of teaching, right? They're
totally from a place of love. It's not like a dictatorial created position. It's more, similar to the mother in that they're being protective and they're trying to, to issue their goodness and help for their siblings.
Right,
but where that can stop is when it comes time to start talking about, what we think about particular ideas.
Mm-hmm. Or even, our other siblings who maybe don't share the same idea as them. And, it's just not an easy conversation to have.
Well, a perfect example for me, just to kind of bring this theory to, to more of a real case scenario is, my older sister and I started talking about matters that had to do with, medical freedom and issues having to do with, vaccine choice and that kind of thing. And our brother, has some pretty strong political views. And I'm not going to get into that because I don't think that's the point of this podcast. I think it's more about how people behave with their strong points of view. And so my sister was explaining that she's been getting, these texts from my brother, texts and emails. She said they were conspiracy texts. And that kind of perked my interest because that's another phrase that people are throwing around, kind of easily and without really thinking too deeply about it. It's almost become, a pejorative to say, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, everything's a conspiracy theory if you really break it down. But so I kind of, I didn't challenge her, but I said, okay, what exactly do you mean by conspiracy theory? And I said, was he sending you information about medical issues or about political issues? She said, well, everything. I said, well, and they're all conspiracy? I just want to know better what you mean when you say conspiracy. And she said, well, it's from Rumble. And I said, well, okay, but that's nothing. That means that's a platform. Like that isn't a conspiracy. That's an actual platform. She says, well, I Wikipedia'd Rumble. And so then because it's a little bit of a hot button for me is that there's, when it comes to Wikipedia, there's, who's in charge of Wikipedia. Rather than me asking her that, I just said, oh, Wikipedia is garbage. And here I am now, taking my positional correctness as if I have some sort of a, license to determine what she shouldn't be using for her information. And, that was my positional correctness, because I think I have some sort of better understanding than her. And quickly it devolved because now she's on the defensive. And what was a very pleasant conversation, to try and understand, what's going on in family dynamics became, defensive.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, that sort of wall gets put up. You're going along in love and everything. Right. And all of a sudden, boom, there's this wall you crash into. And, we're all guilty of it. We are always, I think there's a genetic disposition or the way we humans are built to want to have this agreement with other people. We want that
affirmation. We don't want to be ostracized. For
right,
sure.
Right. And you don't want to offend anybody. And as you said, you don't want to be labeled. So with social media and the way, you look at Twitter and everything else right now, it's a cesspool of exactly what we as humans really don't want.
Yeah, it can be, right? Obviously, there's good and bad to all social media, but when it becomes a platform for just throwing out jabs like I did, like Wikipedia is garbage. Like, that's unfair because Wikipedia is not garbage. I use it all the time. What I really meant to say is you have to be careful when you use Wikipedia. And that would have been a heck of a lot less positionally correct on my part. And I don't know why sometimes it's so easy, especially in today's environment, to get on the wrong side of that. And I think that's what's, so important about the topic of today is, why do we get so agenda driven when it comes to, being correct? Like we want people to agree with us rather than, just listen to what they have to say.
Listening is such a underdeveloped tool that we have.
Empathetically.
Exactly.
I mean, whatever my sister was feeling, I always want to be empathetic towards her, but I wasn't doing that because I was taking some sort of a high ground that I know better than her.
I think that's a little different than, you're a parent and you're bringing up a child and, you in a sense, your positional correctness there is almost a responsibility in some ways. Right. So in a sense, you're responsible. And so that builds this thing. And you can see how a career or a sibling, place in the family, we talked about
being one's boss.
Yeah. Or being one's boss or being, I remember, I was a journalist for many years and I remember hearing people talk about something. Oh no, I'm a reporter. I know I've seen this and that. And it's like, that just shuts everything right down.
It's almost because I think, like you said, we have a biological need to be heard and to be accepted, but we also have this underlying fear of being ostracized or rejected. And so with that, it's a form of just general insecurity that too many of us walk around with. And so when we get involved in these conversations, it quickly becomes defensive because we're letting our insecurities rule the conversation rather than, our original desire for love and free exchange of ideas.
And you go from love to, fight or flight in an instant and you're gone, so you have all these things to be conscious of. And I think, how this can help us if we're conscious of that concept, if you will, of being positionally correct. If we're aware of something, we can adjust it, right?
Kind of like if we were able to slow down for a minute when we see ourselves heading towards one of these conversations, and rather than dig into our position, whatever it may be, boss, sibling, scholar, just person who thinks he has the most experience in this topic, rather than do it from that lens, do it with pause and from a sense of being, more open. And in fact, when we were talking earlier about critical thinking, I was thinking what a nice change it would be if we could say critical open thinking, because that's really what's critical right now, is to be more open and more willing to exchange ideas than dug into our position, whatever it is.
Yeah. I was thinking about the results of hardcore positional correctness. Some of it sounds so obvious, but it can easily result in labeling of anyone who doesn't, isn't aligned with your position. It's demonization, really.
Right.
It enhances the tribalism. It just makes that so much more of a, oh, well, I'm not, that person, I forget about it. They're over out there. That's my crazy uncle.
They're on the wrong side of that issue.
And in a way, it's a sort of a form of bullying. If you think about, people in the workplace, your boss, oh, you're one of those, well.
It is bullying. You're right. It is like bullying because you want to be part of the group, and it doesn't really matter to you if that leaves other people isolated, and nobody really sets out wanting to do that. But when it comes to having an opinion about something, I think those internal needs and insecurities that we have get in the way of what we really want. I was thinking there's this phrase that is bantered around a lot. I don't know if it's a Mark Twain quote or whatnot, but it goes something along the line of it's easier to fool someone than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. And I think it's obviously very true, right? But I think, deep into that phrase is this idea of convincing somebody that they've been fooled. Well, nobody wants to be told that they've been fooled. And, so when you get involved in these conversations and you say, well, Wikipedia is garbage, I'm basically telling her she's been fooled and she doesn't know what she's talking about. And it could be anything. It could be any phrase where you're basically telling somebody that whatever it is you've learned, you're wrong, or somebody duped you, or you've been duped. And again, that comes from a place of this, moral high ground or positional correctness that now look at, I don't think we're looking to try and start a new wave I don't think that was your intention with this idea of political correctness, to start a new phrase out there. But I think it is an interesting way of analyzing what we do when we get involved in these social situations and talk about things, especially in this charged environment.
Yeah, for me, it was a way of putting a name to something that is maybe a little bit more dynamic oriented than, evangelistic. You've got the neighbor who's just being evangelistic about this political position, whatever it is, and they're just in an,
right.
And
but we're not going to use it as a phrase like critical thinking or whatever to say, hey, you're just using positional correctness. No, the idea, I think,
is to understand that it's there and it can be there.
Is to help use it as a lens for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So that you're not putting, that other person
finding yourself in the position of doing what you didn't intend to do, which is, putting people on the defensive.
My older sister, whom I love very much, posted something on Facebook the other day that I thought was just as I was thinking, as it often happens. The spirit connects things in very synchronistic ways. And as I was thinking about this topic, she posted a meme, and in the words it said, "Be careful not to dehumanize those you disagree with. In our self-righteousness, we can become the very things we criticize in others and not even know it." So to me, that positional correctness is a way of saying, hey, Vince, you're getting there, or to just put a label on it, like I know when I'm cranky, I know when I'm doing this, but it's got to take a lot of thought and sort of
that was pretty deep of her to, and not only deep, it was brave to kind of admit that, I always thought, was that funny? Again, I'm reaching here, but it's something along the lines of people saying, I don't like judgmental people.
Right.
It's like, right. Kind of pointing a finger back at yourself when you're making that statement. But here she's basically saying, be careful and that is so true. When you point a finger out at others, you are pointing three back at yourself. And at the end of the day, the only thing we're really capable of controlling is our own self. And you can say, well, that person made me feel like this, or that person is judgmental, whatever. But typically it's you being self-judgmental or self-critical. And it's yourself that is feeling that way, not somebody else making you feel that way.
Right. That's so true.
Which is why I think your phrase is so helpful in that it provides a lens. Any other, all right, so we're talking bosses and we're talking siblings, that could be used universally across many spectrums. You're talking about the neighbor, which is probably, less charged because it's easy to kind of drive by the neighbor and not meet eyes with them.
Or build a fence.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But
we don't want to do that.
Right. Well, does proximity equal expertise? I mean, hey, or anything.
Well, then let me ask you, how do you think we could use this concept of positional correctness to make ourselves better, to make the world a better place.
Right. So how can
I'm asking you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I tried to get it back to you, but you wouldn't have it. Well, I think one is being aware that it's possible that that's where this positioning of being correct is coming from. In other words, why do I have such a need to convince this other person of my position? First of all,
Right.
Do I want them to have my position just because I think I'm right? Or do I really want to have a conversation with that person?
Brilliant.
And really, what is meaningful conversation in the political arena anymore anyway?
In any
right?
arena, meaningful
Right.
conversation is mutual growth, mutual respect, mutual, inquiry for truth. And I used both my fingers up in the air when I said truth. And I think that's really what I know you and I, since we were, young kids walking our dogs back in the old neighborhood, that's what we've always, wanted to find is truth. I think everybody wants to find truth. We just all have different ideas of what truth is. But if you come into a conversation believing fully well that you have the license on truth, I would say that you come to that conversation maybe with a full cup.
Yeah, yeah. And the lens of how can it help is, if you're looking to help the community, if you're looking to help the fellow human spirits, with just harmonizing, that's kind of in opposition of that, right? Exactly. If I know
Right.
best, then why do you even need to have a conversation?
Right. What's the good of having an opinion and then running around to get everybody to agree with that opinion? How are you ever going to grow from that unless you really believe that you have every last piece of information that you need for the rest of your life? Which, if anybody does believe that, well, they're probably not listening to this podcast.
True. And think about the range of discrepancy in the positive and negative energy of doing that. You're not creating positive energy. You're not using positive energy, and you're not allowing other people to have positive energy. You're really just throwing negative energy out there.
I mean, I guess it's possible that you could have an opinion on something that is in fact true. And your goal is to help enlighten others with this supposed truth. But if you really want to do that, you don't want to do it in a condescending way because you have some sort of, upper hand in the conversation. You want to do it in a way that's mutually nurturing to the participants in the conversation, especially when you talk about family events. I mean, I think that's what we all really need to do as we start exercising these social muscles in this post-COVID world, is to take a little time to think a little more directly about where you're coming from before you speak. Are you coming from a place of opinion? Are you coming from a place of quote unquote truth? Or are you coming from a place of love? If you're coming from those places, I guess that's a good starting point. But if you're reacting and you're insecure and you're wanting desperately to be affirmed, you might want to take a pause and take a deep breath and regroup a little bit before you say anything.
That's so hard. Honestly, most people are conditioned to talk fast, they're already thinking of their answer when they're hearing the other person speak. So listening becomes a critical part of having any meaningful conversation.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
And it's hurtful. I know when you always love it when, especially at these large events, hey, how you doing? And you start to tell them, and the next thing you know, they're looking at somebody else.
Yeah,
that
right.
Just walked by and like, do you really want to know how I'm doing? No, but right. And I think that there's a sense of, being present, and not only being present, but being humble. You talked earlier, you used the phrase dehumanize. We want to be careful, of course, not to dehumanize anybody, because where's the growth in that? All you're doing is sending negativity out in the world, and putting people on the defensive is in no way making the world a better place.
Right. So in some cases, I think it might be better to just ignore the things. Ignore. So, you're coming across that. You're getting to that point in the conversation where it's going to get, and you're speaking with someone that does not share the same opinion as you.
And they may say something patently wrong, like they sent me a conspiracy. Oh, it's Rumble. Well, that's not a conspiracy. That's a platform. But you don't say that in a condescending way.
Right. So, the thing is, how do you exercise that skill of, one, I mean, do you even at that point? Sometimes I'm like done. I'm like, so how's your new car going? And I'm trying to change the conversation right away from whatever it is we're talking about. But that can also seem a bit
that's
pejorative.
Hiding. Or it's hiding. It's not really meeting the issue directly. I guess it's better than getting in a confrontive argument with somebody you love. But I think really what we need to do is, like you said, get back to that lens of, am I using some form of positional correctness? And stop yourself and say, what is my goal here? Is my goal here to force my views on other people? Or is my goal here to help make the world a little better place by empathizing and listening? And if you can, you're going to be in a much better place to help get your point of view across if you're doing it in a way that doesn't come from some, dehumanizing or, like you said, positionally correct point of view.
Right. And, you might even learn something if you're talented enough or open enough, I guess is a better way of saying it, to slowing down, listening, and trying to learn something from that other person. What can I learn from this conversation?
Yeah. What do you think about, there's been this rule this goes back as far as I was a kid. So at least 50, maybe 55 years that I was paying enough attention at dinner tables to want to have meaningful conversations at family events. But there's always been this rule, don't talk about religion or politics at the dinner table. And today, certainly religion isn't as a big an issue as it used to be 50 some years ago, but politics sure as heck is. It's bigger and stronger than ever. And I think it's due to the fact that everyone, has access to so much information now, where before, you'd get news at 6 o'clock at night and that would be the extent of it. Now it's round the clock. So we all have these very strong and very emotional feelings about things. And, I think it's, what I'm asking is it a good idea to not be willing to talk about politics at the dinner table? Or is it really a better idea to maybe just adjust our lenses when we do talk about it?
Well, for me, I know when I'm around a conversation that I don't necessarily want to be in, and a lot of times that would be politics at the dinner table, my reaction is mostly to shut down. And then I don't feel good about that.
Yeah, what does that serve?
Right. And
you have something inside of you that's worth hearing.
Maybe it's sort of becoming, I don't know, sometimes you can, trying to just facilitate the conversation in a peaceful, meaningful way, as opposed to trying to jump in and make points. I mean, I grew up in a family where my dad was a social worker, high-level mental health worker, and so was one of my sisters, and very passionate about helping others. And so I would hear my dad, and he was a very positionally correct person, aside from the fact that he was a father, because he was so passionate about helping others. And yet, I could never sort of have a conversation with him because I was more of a business person, a business oriented, sort of a creative person. And it wasn't really a two-way conversation.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. When we were using examples of positional correctness, I guess parent and child is probably one of the strongest ones.
Yeah.
Exactly. But again, but maybe what you felt when you were a child is part of what triggers you to be quiet when things get a little politically charged, because you feel like if you disagree with somebody or get them on the defensive, that you've done something wrong.
Right.
And I think rather than that, because that doesn't do the world any good, us shutting down because we're afraid of, hurting somebody's feelings is not the answer. It's maybe the better way to look at it is, how can we communicate in a way that doesn't hurt somebody else's feelings?
Right. Right. What is the conversation at the dinner table? What's the foundation of it? What's it, is it somebody telling, somebody else?
Is it dictatorial or is it collaborative?
Right. And, you got a lot of different things in that. That's a whole nother dynamic
But I think we just touched on what you're saying with positional correctness. It becomes sort of a dictatorial point of view, rather than a two-way street.
Yeah. And as I thought about this too, the element of everybody has such different experiences in life that it's hard not to come from a point of positional correctness, because if you are in this business, let's say you're a police officer, you see so much of
yeah.
And if you're a social worker,
it affects your view.
A cashier at a grocery store, you see things that you just become passionate about.
Right. People who deal with the retail, for sure.
Yeah. And it's hard not to have that sort of develop over time.
Right. But if you're going to grow in a conversation, and if it's going to be a meaningful conversation, and your objective is to make the world a better place with your conversation, which I would submit most people would say that's what they want to do when they enter into conversations. Maybe some people have the need just to be heard and don't really care if they're making the world a better place. But I think most people at their core want whatever they do to make the world a better place. And if you can do that in conversation, obviously that's a good thing. Or conversely, if your conversation is making the world less than a better place, then I think it's time to look at it in a different lens, as your positional correctness lens gives us the opportunity to do.
Yeah, positional correctness. That's an interesting concept. Like you said, we're not trying to coin a new phrase here or write a book, but we love talking about all things from the lens of how can this help and how can these things be made better. And I think...
yeah, that's good. I don't know. This is a little bit of a riff and a little bit of a rant, but I think it was very interesting. And I'd be real curious to hear what our listeners think about it when they, there's a spot in our podcast where you can make comments, and we would love to hear your comments on, first of all, the concept of positional correctness and, how it relates to everyday conversations. And really, what does anybody intend to do when they have conversation with people at family events or social events in general?
Yeah, I think that about covers it for today. I think that's a great place to leave it.
Well, I'm going to go to the gym and continue exercising my social muscles now, Vince, and I'm going to do that with the extra barbell of positional correctness with me.
Make sure that barbell is positionally correct so you don't hurt yourself, Joe.
Yeah, exactly. Don't want to drop it on my toes.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for listening, Joe. Thank you for being Joe. And
you as well, Vince.
We'll see you soon.
Well, so ends another episode of Friends in Wonder. We really want to thank you for listening. If you'd like to listen to more episodes, provide feedback, questions, or even suggest topics you'd like us to wonder about in future episodes, be sure to check us out at friendsinwonder.com. We'd also be grateful if you'd subscribe, like, or share this podcast. Until next time, I'm Joe.
And I'm Vince.
And we're Friends in Wonder.